Something went wrong in Voskresensk, near Moscow, and this doesn't seem like one of those headlines that say, "There's a problem somewhere in Russia." The place in question is Voskresensk Mineral Fertilizers, one of Russia's largest chemical plants. But the real issue isn't the plant itself, it's where the problem occurred. The incident didn't occur in a routine part of the factory. It happened in the sulfuric acid workshop, that is, at the heart of the system, the most closely monitored area, where the least margin for error is allowed. This is what makes one pause and think. But it's not common for them to happen right in the center. And from this point on, it goes beyond just a fire broke out. When the sulfuric acid line goes down, the factory doesn't just slow down for a while. Everything stops. The safety systems lock up. The connected production lines shut down. The personnel are evacuated. So there's no need for a huge explosion or a massive sabotage operation. Just touching the right spot is enough to shut down the entire system. This is where the question arises. If this is Ukraine's doing, why exactly here? The answer is actually very clear. This facility doesn't just produce fertilizer. It is also involved in chemical processes linked to the explosives production chain. Moreover, it is part of the supply chain for some critical chemical components used in aviation. So, a disruption here won't immediately be seen as an explosion on the front lines, but it will directly strain the Russian army's rear. Ammunition production slows down. Maintenance and repair times increase. Scheduled shipments are delayed. The front does not collapse immediately, but it begins to falter. And this coincides precisely with what Ukraine has been doing recently. Instead of fighting meter by meter on the front lines, it is quietly wearing down the system that keeps the front lines standing. Hitting an ammunition depot is loud, but its effect is short-lived. Disabling a chemical pipeline like this is silent, but its effect is prolonged. The intense smell felt in neighboring areas and the discomfort experienced by people also show that this is not a matter that will be resolved in 2 hours. It takes days for such a pipeline to become safe again. During that time, there is no production, there is no compensation, there is only waiting. That's why what happened in Voskresensk doesn't look like a random industrial accident. If this is a deliberate move, it's a pressure tactic that challenges the Russian army not just on one front, but simultaneously in both production and supply. Silent, unobtrusive, but the kind that becomes a nuisance in the long run. And when we look at the field, at the Lyman line, in a moment, we will see much more clearly why this pressure is not confined to the depths. The simultaneity of these operations is no coincidence, because the pressure applied in the field is not focused on a single point, but spreads across different layers at the same time. The Lazar unit, affiliated with the Ukrainian National Guard, entered the fray in Lyman. The operation was not a random encounter. It targeted a pre-identified and prepared set of objectives. 10 armored vehicles and support elements belonging to Russian forces were neutralized in the area where they were deployed before the assault even began. The critical aspect of the operation here is this: these vehicles were not hit while moving. They were hit while waiting to move. The unmanned systems used by the Lazar Union operate in the region not only to strike, but also for long-term surveillance and target verification. In other words, this operation was not a spur-of-the-moment opportunity. It was the result of a long-awaited moment. It was determined in advance which vehicles were stationed where, which were prepared for attack, and which support elements would accompany them. The subsequent precision strikes were directed not at a single point, but at the entire chain of attack. Armored vehicles were disabled. Support vehicles were rendered inoperable. Fuel and logistics elements were targeted simultaneously. This means that the attack did not just stop, it became impossible to launch. The most challenging part for the Russian side here is how to compensate for this loss, because such elements are not sent to the front as spares. Every armored vehicle, every support vehicle is part of a specific plan. When this plan is disrupted, replacing it is not just a matter of vehicles. It is a matter of time, resupply, and redeployment. That is why this operation in Lyman, while not creating a major break on the map, is changing the sentiment on the ground. Units are waiting, ready for forward movement. But now every preparation is more fragile. Every deployment becomes a potential target. This brings caution to the fore, not the desire to advance. And when we read this picture alongside the infrastructure pressure we discussed around Moscow, the picture becomes clearer. While production and supply lines are being strained in the rear, offensive preparations on the front lines are being thwarted one by one. The system is being squeezed not from one place, but from different points at the same time. In the south of Russia, a region quite far from the front lines, North Ossetia, and this region becomes the target of Ukrainian drones at night. At this point, the issue is not how many drones were used. The real issue is why here. North Ossetia is one of Russia's relatively secure regions in terms of internal security. It is not close to the front lines. It is not an area under constant alert. In other words, we are talking about a depth that is given secondary priority in Russia's defense planning. Ukraine's choice of this line sends a direct message. Following this attack, not only the region but a wider area is affected. Air traffic is temporarily restricted in cities such as Vladikavkaz, Grozny, and Magas. In other words, not just one location, but multiple centers are forced to take precautions simultaneously. This extends the impact of the attack far beyond physical damage. Figures provided by the Russian Ministry of Defense complete the picture. It is reported that 63 unmanned aerial vehicles were intercepted across Russia overnight. This number is significant because it shows that we are talking about a dispersed and distracting pressure, not an attack focused on a single region. And this is where the real gain for Ukraine emerges. The fundamental purpose of such attacks is not to destroy a single target. The goal is to force Russia to constantly rewrite its air defense and internal security plans. Because every deep strike puts the Russian side in this dilemma. Should you focus on the front lines or secure the interior regions? When both are attempted simultaneously, resources are divided. Air defense systems are spread over a wider area. The alert level remains constantly high. And this reduces decision-making speed and flexibility, even if it is not directly visible at the front. Another critical point is the psychological impact. The sounding of alarms far from the front line undermines the perception that the war is confined to a controlled area. For Ukraine, this represents both military and strategic pressure. It sends the message, I can operate not only on the front line, but also in the rear. Moreover, these attacks are not isolated. The fact that alarms sounded across a wide geography, from Belgorod to Bryansk, Rostov to Voronezh, on the same night, demonstrates a simultaneous attrition strategy. In other words, Ukraine is creating a burden of attention spread across the map, rather than forcing Russia to focus on a single point. Therefore, this attack on North Ossetia cannot be read as a standalone headline. It is part of Ukraine's recent approach, applying direct pressure on the front lines while keeping Russia constantly on edge in the background. It appears quiet, but the cost is rising. And this cost accumulates not only through the reduced number of UAVs, but also through divided attention, scattered defenses, and slower decision-making. It advances silently. There is no noise. But its impact accumulates on the ground. And this pressure does not stand alone. Because while alarm bells ring in the depths, Atesh is now coming into play on Russia's rear flank. Far from Russia's front lines, a point that looks small on the map but has a big function, Bryansk. What is happening here is much quieter than an explosion heard on the ground, but its impact touches the very heart of the road to the front. The pro-Ukrainian partisan group, Atesh, claims to have sabotaged an electrical substation in Bryansk. The target is not a building. The target is flow. That is, the functioning of infrastructure linked to railways, fuel facilities, and military shipments. The critical point here is this. When a substation goes offline, there is no rule that says everything stops completely. But the system begins to falter. Signaling problems arise, train traffic slows down, pumping and security processes at fuel facilities take longer. In other words, the line to the front becomes irregular. According to Atish's claim, the sabotage was carried out at a point supplying energy to the military infrastructure. This infrastructure includes a train station used to transport ammunition and military equipment to the front lines. So it's not just one facility, it's multiple lines being disrupted at the same time. This is where the logic of this move lies for Ukraine. Disabling a vehicle at the front is instantaneous, but disrupting the line that supplies that vehicle creates sustained pressure over time. The railway runs late, shipping schedules shift, fuel flow becomes irregular, and none of this registers with the troops on the ground as something happened. But at the command level, questions arise. Why is this shipment delayed? Why are we checking the same line again? Why is everything moving slower than planned? This is exactly where Atish operates. No noise, no spectacle. But there is a constant, disturbing effect. The most difficult aspect of this type of sabotage for Russia is the uncertainty. An airstrike is a clear threat. A missile attack can be tracked. But sabotage leaves the question, where will it happen again? Open. This means more security, more control, and more resources. So the attention that should be on the front lines is held back at the rear. And when we broaden the picture, the connection becomes clear. Alarms are sounding deep inside North Ossetia. The rhythm of supply is disrupted in Bryansk. One keeps Russia on edge, the other slows it down. When these two combine, there may not be a major collapse on the front lines. But advancing becomes costly, and waiting becomes risky. This is precisely what Atish aims to achieve, to challenge sustainability. A silent sabotage. But it's done in the right place. And that's why the transformer in Bryansk, though small on the map, leaves a big question mark in the background of the war. Where will the next one fail? The common thread in today's topics is this. There don't seem to be any major fractures on the map, but the system is being strained step by step. And sometimes wars slow down most in the places you can't see. Where do you think this pressure will push Russia further? Be sure to share your thoughts in the comments. And let's discuss different perspectives together. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on these kinds of analyses. See you in the next video, and have a great day, everyone.